I have a couple announcements that pertain really only to people who are staying at the Ivy Inn Hotel. Because there's been some problems with shuttle service, apparently. Their shuttle service stops at 9 o'clock, so they cannot come and get anybody after that time. I'm sorry about that. But we can get taxis up here easy. I think 255 taxi is Madison Taxi, if I'm not mistaken. Something like that. But it's in the phone book. And they can be here in like 5 minutes. So the shuttle is coming for the Ivy Inn people today at 5:45 and again at 6 to take you back to the Ivy Inn. And they're returning at 6:45 and at 7. They probably, I don't know if they can take everyone. If they can't, again, cabs are quick in that case. And the shuttles, the other thing is that the shuttles are, you really have to sign up for them because they do have a limited amount of space apparently. And again, I apologize for that, but we can't do anything about that. So that's the announcements. Yeah, I think that's the announcements. So this panel humbles me. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce them. Doris Chase, Elaine Summers, Daniel Negrin, and Amy Greenfield. And with that, I'll let them begin in that order.
I like to stand when I talk. I'm old-fashioned, but it's easier for me. And I'm overwhelmed by the scholastic power of you people. It's kind of, not my field at all. But anyway, I'm here, and I did want to show you some things. In order to give you a little background as to where I come from, I'm going to show a section of a tape that accompanies the book that was published about my work in '91. It's called Artist in Motion. And the author of the book also helped with the dialogue on this tape you're going to see. I've worked all my life as an artist, from painting to sculpture to film, video, and now even to glass. And when she starts the tape, you're going to see a shot of a piece of sculpture I did back in 1970. It's a 15-foot steel piece that's on top of a hill in Seattle. And from that part, we'll go right into the tape, moving into the arena of film and dance and sculpture. That's really where I started with dance and sculpture. And I thought this would introduce my work more quickly and give you a tossed salad peek at a variety of possibilities that I've come across. So we can start? Thank you. Choreographer Mary Staton asked if I would work with her. I began making kinetic sculpture that would, in effect, perform in partnership with the dancers. These collaborations were much more complex. I had to rethink the materials, the engineering of my sculpture. I started researching with people who had expertise in plastics, fiberglass, while at the same time collaborating with the choreographer and dancers. In 1969, Mary and I collaborated on a multimedia production for the Seattle Opera Company called Mantra. This production was a revelation to me in many ways. Configurations of the dancers, the sculpture, the kinds of movements that they achieved, I could never have predicted. I wanted to capture this experience in some permanent way. I also wanted to expand and elaborate the visual effects. We convinced King Screen to make a film of the production with the stipulation that I could use some of the outtakes for another project. I was already at work with the Boeing Company people on a computer film, and this film became Circles 1. I knew that film was an ideal medium for capturing movement. It was also a medium that was very new for me. I put together a team, found Frank Brown and Robert Ovey to help me work out the technical effects. Circles 2 was made entirely from outtakes of the King Screen Mantra production. We chose those outtakes and visually transformed them, created a whole new film. Most images in Circles 2 are composed like a traditional easel painting. They are centered, symmetrical. The organic forms play against the edges of the frame. The palette is somewhat like a watercolor, soft pastels and various shades of yellow, blue, purple. It's created with a very exacting series of color separations. I approached this film as a kind of painting in colored light, also as a means of capturing the kinetic energies of sculpture and dance. The content, in other words, was as important as the form. I felt I was moving with the spirit of the time, leaving behind canvas and paint in favor of multimedia technology that could reach larger audiences. I continued working on multimedia productions with sculpture for dance and also creating new versions of these dances for film and video. This is the same footage processed with a video synthesizer, giving very different experience of dance. It's a dance that could not exist on stage. I moved to New York in 1972 and was introduced to the latest video technology at the television lab at WNET. This experience was a revelation. I found there was a whole range of visual techniques I could create on video more easily than on film. One big drawback to video then was the difficulty in editing. Sometimes I would shoot on film, do my editing on film, and then transfer to tape to create the video effects. Other times I'd shoot on video, then transfer to film to edit. In the early 1970s, I began working on my video sculpture series, which I continued to create for about 10 years. I was dealing with a new definition of kinetic sculpture. Each of these tapes begins with a shot of one of my sculptures or a graphic. These are small modulars. This tape is processed with a Rut-Etra synthesizer. I could manipulate the shape of the image, its position on the screen, its pattern of movement. I worked with multiple cameras, changing lights, sequencers, a variable speed turntable. Here again, I worked in a team situation with someone who not only knew the equipment, but could push the capabilities of the technology. Pierre Boda was of inestimable assistance, as was Steve Rutt. In 1974, Stan Vanderbeek and I taught a workshop in experimental video at Brooklyn College. Immediately thereafter, I began work with the Brooklyn College Dance and Television Department on a project specifically designed to refine and expand the idea of dance for television. In the tapes, the video dances we created could not exist on stage, not just because of the special effects, because of the proximity with the camera. A close-up lens can give a much more intimate, empathetic relationship with the dancer's movements than you ever have on a stage production. With Cynthia Anderson of the Joffrey Ballet, I was trying to capture her essence, her youth, her energy, grace. My dance tapes usually begin with a literal presentation of the theme, then proceed to emphasize high points in the choreography with special effects and multiple ways of framing the dancer's image. In the Brooklyn College tapes, I would often use the technique of debeaming, which creates the liquid trails of color. Debeaming occurs when you manipulate the color guns in the camera control, a disruption of the normal operation. Debeaming technique allowed me to create painterly effects, abstract color shapes. Unlike abstract painting, these abstractions are very mobile. With debeaming, I could translate physical movements, kinesthetic experience into visual equivalents. These images can be related to the concept of a kinetic painting. Yet the kind of empathy you could feel with the movements of the dancer would be literally impossible to achieve in easel painting. The surface of the screen is framed and two-dimensional, like a canvas, but the psychological experience of motion, the physical tension that can be communicated with video images have no real equivalent on canvas. So the term kinetic painting is really a surface analogy that describes one dimension of these video dances. I began a series of collaborations with dancer-choreographer K to K in 1975. Even though the kind of movement she uses are often slight, intimate, at the same time they are very tense in their angularity and compression. I wanted to amplify the drama of these small movements with an intense range of colors. Solarized images like these are created by reversing polarity and using a colorizer. Takei's style of dance is a good one for video. It's intense, dramatic, yet the movements are often very subtle. In this video dance, you have direct access to these movements, almost a voyeuristic perspective. With Jonathan Hollander, later in the 70s, I was still essentially working with sculpture for dance. In this case, one of my dance sculptures, the white form in the background, was created from a graphic of the actual sculpture rocker form. The sculpture tape was produced with a Rodetra synthesizer. Hollander studied my edited tape and then proceeded to choreograph a dance to interact with it. To produce this duet, I used a chroma key set, and this involved shooting the subject against a background of blue or black, then keying or placing this information over the other subject. With chroma key, I could create an optical union of the dancer and the sculpture tape, even though images of the dancer and the sculpture tape were shot at different times. By the end of the 1970s, I felt that I had pushed the existing video technology as far as I could. My video dances evolved to an ever more painterly direction. They still usually began with a relatively straightforward presentation of the dancer, a choreographic theme. In the video with Elaine from 1979, the images were created and modulated by using feedback, an outline generator, matte key, multiple cameras, a high-tech lighting designer, reverse polarity, and a D-beam spectrum analyzer monitoring the music track. In my work with Elaine, I felt I had reached a crossroads, conceptually and technically, and that it was time for a major change. Certainly the fact that I lived and worked in New York, where I could see so many good dancers, was important. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to give you a quick run through from some of them. I probably did about 50 dance films from 70 to 79. And had a wonderful time working. In my work with video dance, I wanted to bring the viewer into the dancer, to know the hands and the feet and the body, and not, to be, as I would say, as a piece of art that one can examine and comprehend, not as a china doll from a distance, but something that moves. And as a living, breathing human, so you're close to it. So many years I would sit in the balcony and watch dance, and it was always so far away. And I thought, oh, if I could only afford front row seats. So I guess a lot of this work comes from that wish to be with the dancer. I'm not sure what I have to offer you, except that when I came to New York, I hadn't even heard of Maya Deren or Loie Fuller. I did know Fred Astaire because he was in a lot of movies, but I started with video when I first arrived, and at that time I did know Merce Cunningham's chance choreographer, and there was Ed M. Schwiller with his interest in electronic engineering. And then there was Stan Vanderbeek and his time allowance for 6-hour happenings. So we each had a different approach. When I address the subject of video dance, and it's my personal approach, I'm not referring to like dance on camera or Dance in America that Merrill Brockway used to do. I never did get into documentaries. I really wanted to offer something other than what the librarians would want to show, or I guess you'd call the scholars, so they could examine the choreography perfectly. But in video dance, for me, the camera is not a passive recording tool. The focus is to capture certain elements that are cinematic. And the allegiance, for me, was to video. However, within this context, there's a partnership with the dancer that can enrich and add infinite variables of time, space, and energy. As in any new art form, which video dance was at that time, there were no rules, and sometimes that's not so good, because constraints really are necessary to refine something. And in trying to encapsulate the whole picture of early video dance, it's a large order. And in a way, it seems like maybe there should be one program with dancer choreographers, you know, showing their work and talking, and then the other for videographers, because it's quite a different, that, you know, between the two of us. One must always remember that a dancer is working and feeling internally, and the videographer is seeing her externally and tries to capture the kinesthesis of the act and to move the process along. I feel very important that dancers who want to work with video should work with the camera for a while and learn how to edit and learn what works and what doesn't work as far as the camera angles and the placements. And the videographer needs to know movement and to love dance and to be aroused just to be with the dance. And it's a good exercise, I think, for anyone who's working with dancers to try to cover a sports event. It gives you an idea of how quickly they must move and how they have to well, in fact, that's why I always worked with a storyboard, because I wanted my camera people to know exactly what I was trying to achieve at certain points. And it makes a tremendous difference in how you're directing it. One thing I definitely feel is important is that there is an understanding and a mutual respect between the dancer and the director, because as long as they can have this respect, they will appreciate, you know, what happens. Maybe a dancer flies out of the screen and, or you lose the hand or whatever. Sometimes that's dreadful as far as a dancer knows it, and yet from the director's standpoint, maybe that is exactly what she felt. I want to make this fairly quick because these things are just sort of nuts and bolts. I tried to make the dance one continuous flow from start to finish. My formula was to make at least 3 complete takes using 3 cameras. And I stayed with my pre-planned storyboard, directing my attention to calling my camera shots and working with my technical director. Above all, I wanted an intimacy and to create with the dancer a unity of the real and of the abstract, of the sensual and the conceptual, of spontaneous wonder of humanity. Let's see what else I should mention here. I think one of the most difficult parts of a production was the limitations of money. At least for me, I had to beg, borrow, and steal to make a dance production. If one was teaching at a university, you have that studio, you have the talent, you have the camera, you have everything, and so often I could trade my doing a production. And in fact, Brooklyn College set it up so I could do 1 production a month, and with the stipulation that when I finished the series, they wanted the collection for their collection, which was fine because, you know, they have a copy, I have a copy. And the same with when I wasn't teaching anymore and I was working in wherever, I made an agreement with a television station. It was it was New York television station. It was a small studio, but it was very workable. And they gave me the studio, the lighting, the camera people, with the stipulation that I also would allow them to run it on television as part of their programming. And, you know, that worked out. So I was able to continue working. And in those days, it was on 2-inch tape. Probably few of you know what that was like. It was huge. And as far as editing goes, it was really difficult because One day I spent 4 hours trying to accomplish one edit. At that time, you would cut the tape, you'd try and figure out where you couldn't see it, but you could almost get to it, and you'd use a razor and cut it, and then you'd paste it together with a metallic tape. And then you'd have to look at it, and then you'd have to change it, and then do it again and do it again. So that's one of the big reasons when I would do my storyboard, I would say we're going to follow this and we're going to go all the way through, because in those days, editing was absolutely devastating. Now it's quite simple. It's a piece of cake, but it's a lot different. Let me think now what I want to tell you. I wanted to make my work so full of energy and color that it literally sang. That's what my work is all about. And I don't know how my time is going, but maybe we could take a clip on that. I'm going to show you my very small studio where I live in the Chelsea Hotel in New York. And there was a camera person working actually she was an actor dancer. So it'll give you an idea of, we can just start it. It'll give you an idea of the scale of the size.
Oh, sorry. Well, maybe we need something there.
Well, the thing is this, you see, music's filling in. All rehearsals are held with the actor, writer, and composer in the hotel where I live.
Now, that's a difference. Bonnie said that I'm not in it. That's a reflection.
Oh, I see. Okay. In my dramatic work, collaborations often take 3 or 4 months rehearsal to translate the poetry or theater into television. When you left that long pause, you had a chance to become your father, instead of become you at another age and then your father. This is the sort of movement we will be coming in with in the bedroom in Paris. And then I forgot my French, I forgot everything, and she goes into this. Today. So this is a 9-foot square room. Corporate boardroom. I'll come striding in, followed by 200 Libyan slaves of various ages, and I will...
Today, in the corporate boardroom, I'll come striding in, followed by 200 Nubian slaves of various ages, and I will dazzle those pale white patriots with a Cecil B. DeMille spectacular brought to you by 400 years of the John Rain, survivors of the Middle Passage. And how dare they say that we are only 30,000?
By recording rehearsals. So that gives you an idea of the space. A 9-foot by 9-foot space is not very big for a dancer to work in, but if they work in it long enough and they see what can be accomplished in a smaller space, I was able to do it so that, in fact, when we went into a big studio, I could have the light set, say, for a 15-foot square area, but I'd have it marked for the dancer to stay as close to the, say, 10-foot by 10-foot. That way, the storyboard would work, and that way, the lighting would only take, say, 2 hours or 3 hours. So in other words, then I'd have the rest of the time, maybe 4 hours, to shoot the dancer. And, but that's one reason I worked always with storyboards, so that they realized what the dancer would do, and she knew what she was going to do, and she knew the limitations. It wasn't always she, it was always sometimes he. And at any rate, it was a little dicey sometimes, but the dancer would always stay with me, and then if we had a little overtime, I did like the little piece you saw with Sarah Rudner called Dance Frame. I mean, that we did at the last 7 minutes, and then we had to get out. And the same with Gaeta Lang, when we did the jazz dance. That was the end of the day, and that was the end of the situation. But it was, you know, you push the dancer, you push the camera people, but that was the only way I could work at that time. And I think there's one shot, I'm going to show you, if there's time, a 1-minute quick peek at the sculpture that I just installed in Seattle, Washington. You can start it. It's bronze, it's 17 feet tall, 4 parts, and it's just...
Her sculpture is based on a model she made probably in 1970. And I'm just glad that 29 years later, a very large piece reflecting that particular time has been built.
This is right at the new entrance of the Space Needle, which is a tall building in Seattle Center. And so that was, you know, just to give you an idea. This is a film that KCTS did in Seattle just
One of the guys
while I was here.
That piece over there said, boy, you know, this is the space. And I thought, you know, I hope that's the way it's going to be for everybody that comes by.
Okay, that's enough. Anyway, it gives you an idea of, you know, what I just finished. And if there are any questions about any of this, I'd be delighted. I did bring some flyers from the Museum of Modern Art. They have several groups of my dance films, and so if you'd like to take a peek, I've got some here. I can leave some outside at the table. Do I take questions now? Sure. We've got the bright lights here. No questions? Super, I can relax.
Yeah, right.
Yes?
You use a lot of very pioneering video techniques that are now, you can do them.
I know.
Having broken through and seen ways of manipulating image, do you think it's still worth doing now that it's just pushing a button? I mean, not that you shouldn't have done it, but
Yeah.
if you're doing a piece now, is it a direction to go?
Well, I know. I mean, I was doing it just by the seat of my pants because, in fact, the engineers, when I would march in, they'd say, oh, no, because, you know, every time I'd say, well, now let's try this. Oh, we can't do that. I said, well, if you do this, you know, and I'd show them how they could make it happen. Then they said, oh, you mean that? And no, it would be beautiful to do it now. It would be, you know, like that. But it wasn't the time. I, you know, started too young, shall we say. Anything else? Yes?
Would you have any words of advice for a similar situation for those of us that go into editing suites and deal with editors in trying new techniques with the technology that we have today, as some of us are coming from dance backgrounds and want to try new innovative ways that we haven't technically been skilled in?
Mm-hmm.
Would you have any words of advice as to how that dancer-editor relationship?
Well, you need to have a friendly editor, because if you don't, you know, you're shot down right from the start. But also you have to, I think, spend a certain amount of time just watching engineers work and find out what the equipment can do, because there are people, like they have these sample tapes that you can say, these are the effects we can do here with this machine. Check those out. See all the information you can. Write it down so you don't say, hey, I think I'd kind of like this, you know, but you have to be very specific so that when you speak to them on a job, they can say, oh, yes, yeah, we can do that. It'll be hard, but we can do it. And, but you must, as a dancer or anyone, you have to go in knowing something about what they're working with. Otherwise, it's not a good game. Okay?
That's great advice.
All right. She's bringing back. Don't ask me questions later. You know, this is it. Yes?
Sorry. I just have one question regarding the musical accompaniments that are going with the tapes. Are the dancers hearing that music when they're performing? Are you listening to it while you're editing, or does that all get laid on post-production?
Well, I usually try to have the music. I know a number of composers, and either they have music on tape that they think would work for what I want, and or they'll work with me on creating. But when we're in the studio, the dancer is hearing the music. It may not be recorded exactly at that time, but a lot of times it is, because sometimes, you know, when you're working in a small studio or in a school, maybe somebody will be, while you're doing the recording, somebody will be talking, you know, what are you going to do after school? Shall we meet here? So you hear this voice in back of it, so you do have to sometimes lift that off, but, you know, professional is different than where most of the artists work, where it's, you know, you're just kind of getting by. Sometimes I do another composition afterwards if it feels better. But as a rule, it works. Okay. Yes. Last question. Yes. Maybe you can just tell.
Yeah, when you were working in New York in the 70s,
Uh-huh.
were you influenced by Elaine and his work at all, or the projections and props and that?
I loved it. Now, where I got started with dance is with Mary Staton, who was the one who was in New York. It was one of his pupils and was one of his teachers. And she wanted me to design sculpture for dance because she'd seen some of my work in some magazines. And she wondered if I could do it, you know, big scale. And I said, come on out, we'll talk. You know, and that's where it started. But I liked what Nikolai did. I thought it was enchanting, you know, but not every day. It's, you know, it's just one of those things. Okay, I'm finished. Thank you.
I'd like to, when I read, I'd like to do that too because it'll be easier to read. Ah, we found it. Hi, I'm Elaine Summers, and as well as being elderly, I hope I'm speaking for all of us, we're ancient warriors. That's what we are. And, oh, that's right, Amy is not ancient yet, but she is a warrior. And,
You have to go in the other room.
I think that we've seen in Doris's work another part of our life as artists, which is the generosity of spirit and the wonderful chance we have through being in love with a tiny, tiny field which is totally enormous, and helping each other over a long period of time and knowing each other and being able to watch each other's work. But the part that really is so incredible about Doris is, from a dance and film dancer's viewpoint, her life as a sculptor and a real giant and with a multiple mind going there. I'm going to follow Doris's example because it will be easier. I brought the display which you see, which it happens that Douglas, when he called and told me that he wanted us to be on a panel together called Mapping the Territory, it just happens to be what I'm doing with every minute I can grab a hold of, mapping the territory for a new work. So I, of course, want to tell you about that because you are all invited to be part of it. And it's called Sky Time, January 1st, 2001 through January 1st, 2002. It's a communication, art, and science celebration of the sky. And you can communicate in all the methods there are, starting with what we're doing, and I'm running around doing this in between time, word of mouth, hand drums, all the way to the electronic super skyway. And you can do whatever you want. You can dance bare naked in your backyard, and it counts. So you can also do satellite work. That's okay too. And I'm mapping and planning, which we all have to do as artists, the economic structure. And someday, Douglas, maybe we can have a whole thing on the economics of mapping, right? Or mapping the economics of how you're going to do this impossible thing. And when Doris was talking, you know, it's easier at the edge, this is an answer to one of the questions, when something is just beginning, it's easier for the artist to jump on and grab a hold and do what they want to do. I think about when I first started this, there were no women in the film world. Since there may be feminists here, I wouldn't want to indicate that that was a help. It was. And when people were shooting, they would have, I mean, commercial people, you could go to their place of shooting, and they would give you what were called the tail ends, which meant that they were doing a toothpaste ad and they only used 3 minutes of a 12-minute reel, and you got 9 minutes of raw film for free. So it's harder in this very high technological time, and Bouquet and I were talking about this a little while ago, to have little fringe benefits like that that are, you don't have to write a big grant for, and you know, all those et ceteras. But you still have the wonderfulness of people who love to work with creative ideas and may not be doing that. They may be being, you know, doing a job they're really not crazy about, including sometimes the owners of a film company who have all the equipment, but they didn't use it on weekends. And they always dreamed they were going to go out and use this beautiful 16mm Arriflex, but they never had the time. Now I think it's much harder. I know that Rafiq for years offered us very cheap studio time. So I've already started about economics, but that's not what I meant to talk about. But I do want to mention the whole thing about coming to each other's studio and showing our work to each other. It was very important to me when Doris came and showed me her work, and when Amy came and showed me the mud dance, which Hillary Harris had shot for her. And I said, wow, that's some filmmaker we've got going here, and dancer. And it was scandalous and daring, because, you know, I'm sure you've all seen it, that she wore no clothes. But she put clothes back on, and I guess that's what Douglas was talking about. I mean, in terms of, you know, being scandalous by doing the opposite. Okay, I wrote this. And I brought, see all those things over there? I brought no, steady there. I brought no pictures with me. You can come and see a couple of movies next time. And the movies are also ephemera from other work, larger work that I did. The film dances, I mean. They're like 8, 11 minutes long. And they were done at a time when I kind of like big stuff. I like intermedia. I like, what we saw last night of Yen, I wrote Yin Wen Yu, and the work that he did with, you're in the audience and I'm losing the name, but I was so carried away because, you know, we ancients have grandchildren, and whether you will be or not, you are. And I want to claim you, because that was a perfectly magnificent piece of what is called intermediate or multidisciplinary work, and it's deep in my heart, and I still find in looking at Yin's work that I love that richness, that it was beautiful realization. And I loved what Douglas said today about corporealizing, you know, and we're at, I'm going to be scattered, we're at a time in life, in the art life, where we're again on a brink, and you are on that edge, and have enough in your background that's synthesized through you, maybe electronically, maybe angels, maybe magic, and that's a wonderful time, because later it will become slicker and slicker. I loved last night when the computer was on the screen, and we couldn't get it to do what it's supposed to do, and but it was so fresh, and the dance idea was so apparent and so unhidden, and the technological tools that we're working with were right there to see, and all of us have been swearing at our Emacs and swearing at our various kinds of equipment. For me, I've been working 5 years. I just can't really manage it, you know. It's all I could do to learn how to run a camera and do editing. And this whole new technological field is such a wild, wild world. And of course, Skytime is really all about that. So anyway, on to mapping the territory. I feel that art and science are the way we make visible our invisible terrain, our minds. And without these forms of expressing ourselves and learning to use them, I see you go by, I only see you as how you look on the outside. But when we looked at Doris's work, when we look at each other's work, and we talk about it, and we have somebody to share our talking about and our madness, I think it's the core of life. I think it's incredibly wonderful. I've been away in Sarasota for about 13 years, and my husband and I have got to return to New York because the opportunity to really be with people who are living that kind of life and who are willing to show their minds. I mean, you know, like Meredith Monk laid out her mind in 16-millimeter earrings, and I went, oh. And Doris showed us just a tiny bit of her mind right now. And Daniel I've known since I first came to New York. He was one of my first teachers. I came very late. I made up my mind at 28 that I was going to go and be a choreographer and a dancer, and I auditioned for Juilliard School of Dance, and they took me in. And then later, when I had to pay attention to osteoarthritis, I came to Daniel for his classes, and they were technically, in terms of alignment, which is so incredible, just magnificent classes. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And so, in their own way, our multiple minds, visual, kinetic, oral, dimensional, emotional, and many more minds that we own all of, express themselves through the arts, sciences, and technology, and they reveal our own invisible world of thoughts, imagination, ideas, and the logic and illogic of our many kinds of mind. They discover the invisible world of life, or some of the more objective realities of life. All the arts and the sciences are ways of communicating, whether it is between our inner selves, minds, or with each other. Technology gives us the gift of tools and inventions to realize, create, and make visible these invisible worlds. In every age, they reveal, discover, create entire new territories for us to play with. As our population increases, the speed and magic of the development and structures available to us seem to increase exponentially. Long ago in Maine, when I was 22, my neighbor, an 8-year-old boy, would run across the field between our houses, waving and shouting, "You know what you could do if you had a," which might be a frog, which might be a ladder. I never knew what it was that we could do if we had a. There it is, I thought, the wonder of our spirit, not just curiosity, but our innate desire and ability for exploration, to synthesize, create, put together, build, and receive somehow through the air each other's what's going on. So we get synergistic creations where we're all kind of thinking in the same kind of way. Anyway, we put them together and we build from whatever we find. Do the worlds of thought, ideas, emotions, visual, kinetic, oral, dimensional, change? Or do our technologies just give us new ways of expressing and communicating? They have said that there is nothing new under the sun, and yet we have never been to the moon before. The power to get there has always been there, but we did have to find a new way to make the journey to the old, new territory. The territory of the moon was and remains visible, but the tools and the art and the science for the journey were hidden until they were discovered. What will our newfound ability to claim the territory of the moon and to stay in touch with the people who will explore the actual territory, what will it bring to us? What will the newfound world of the moving image, film, video, internet, satellites, digital bring to us? What will the making and projecting of kinetic images bring to us? It is amazing to think that 16mm film has only been a possibility since the 1890s, and its early technology is being replaced in just 100 years. So it will become kind of a fossil to look at and enjoy as part of our heritage. The art and science are basically the same, but the technology has changed our possibilities. I think about those early first 16mm films by Thomas Edison and Lumiere and Méliès the Magician. Have you all seen those? Well, they're wonderful. Edison, they discovered, explored, mapped this new territory. Edison and Lumiere took the technological tool of slow motion and created the effect of Loie Fuller's floating chiffons and scarves, which Sally Somers has written wonderfully about. Edison explored superimposition in the serpentine dance of Annabelle Moore. Méliès the Magician translated his magic to augment the narrative by creating a way for the devil to pop in and out of view in no way known to man. And it looked real, too. They may not have realized every detail of the possibilities, but they explored the deep underworld of the territory of 16mm filmed kinetic images. Everything is right there in those early films. As a part of New York University's master's degree program, I fell in love with the early filmmakers' struggles and their delight in exploring the new media that they had invented. The image of Thomas Edison going out to Coney Island to film all the dancing girls, longing to film Loie Fuller, and knowing that she was off in Paris with Lumiere, and he was filming her dances of light and floating, which of course were perfect dancers for the new media of film. And when Lumiere's son solved the projection problem by putting sprocket holes in the edges of the film, Edison was a great businessman, and he ruined Edison's business life because Edison had what do you call it when you hold it? Yeah, on projection equipment, but he hadn't found the holes. Yes, he had got that all started. Lumiere's son punched holes in which stabilized the image, and Edison was so furious that he said, Douglas, he said, this film thing is not what I thought it was. I thought it was a great tool for education, and it's nothing but entertainment. This study led to being awarded a Fulbright Fellowship for 3 months of study in Italy, France, and England. I did this study for my master's, as I mentioned. Universities are great. I chose the early and the contemporary film dance choreographers of Europe. Writing this paper has given me the understanding that it was a mapping expedition of this large, exciting, our literature of dance. Gradual creation by many artists using all the technology as it changes and develops of an enormous body of incredible dance. Along with all the delights of seeing the new media explored and used through the work of artists, scientists, and inventors as they develop and live in the new territory, there will be the projection of the future development of this territory. There will be the claiming of the boundaries, the limitations, the possession of the territory's terrain. Is it rocky? Is it windswept? Subject to earthquake? Quicksand. Sometimes a territory will be apparent but not explored or developed. This symposium is a seminal occasion, which we have talked about earlier. Are you envisioning a tiny but essential area of the entire vision? Is your area a private, hidden place? How will it be possible to assemble and organize the mapping and creation of your work? Some of us are creating strong, flexible structures for visibility and accessibility of the entire field of film, video, and dance. And one of the delights is here we've got a tool that you and I can sit all alone and watch fabulous works of art. We can see Doris' sculpture way off there in Seattle. We can see Daniel's early work. Documentations are wonderful too. And we can see all these things all by ourselves. And simultaneously, millions of people all over the world can see the same thing. The Millennium thing on PBS was so exciting to me because it's like Sky Time. It's kind of how I envisioned one part of Sky Time, because Sky Time includes all different kinds of performances and sizes of audiences and performers. And it was just wonderful. Deidre Towers, director of Dance Film Association, who runs, or flies rather, and dancers over this difficult terrain, is offering dance filmmakers and presenters many ways of communicating about the opportunities for distribution and presentation. Amy Greenfield's recognition and proposal of mapping the entire American film dance territory with a presentation at the Joseph Papp Public Theater film dances, which covered film dances from 1893 to 1983. This rich, creative expression of the terrain of film dance history was presented in a catalog. It's over there. You can see it later.
I'll hold it up.
Have you got one there? Good. With excellent articles and photographs. And Doris is in there, too. But she's not in the index. Since that time, there is encouragement and support in Europe for film video dance. American and European choreographers are creating dance that can only be seen on screens and is not a documentary or a record. There are lively distribution companies, particularly in France. It was very interesting on that Fulbright trip to see the differences in the three countries that I went to, England and France and Italy. In Italy, in reference to the gentleman, professor who was speaking this morning about Italy and the political side of film and choreography. I saw no early in the middle. I saw early film where? Griffith. You know, Griffith's big things that were supposed to be the first of its kind were actually begun in Rome, Italy, and I don't remember the man's name, but he did battleships, because one of the things that happened in the early times was that the camera, Edison was running off to the Coney Island, but Lumiere was training cameramen, and he was sending them all over the world to do news. So when you went to the movies, which were a scandalous place to go, literally, you would see mainly news that was brought in like as overnight as they could do it and distributed it everywhere. It was amazing where they were distributed and how big that distribution system was. But Griffith hired that cameraman to do, to work on his first big film, and, but nonetheless, he didn't like to say that. So that was the early Roman Italian thing, and then when the fascists came in, when Mussolini came in, they used a great deal of film and money to record all of the regional dances, although I never did see anything of the trance dance of the Spider. They actually, I got my first alternative Fulbright because I wanted to study trance dancing in an island off the Italian coast where you get bit by a spider, the tarantella, and the tarantella dance began. Oh, wonderful history we have, full of fun. So anyway, American, I got that, I'm doing this right. And France, France. They had the Cinémathèque de la Danse where Patrick Bensard and Remy Bernard run this place where you can go and you can see Loie Fuller. And the interaction between our critics and our students of film dance